But first, financial fragility. Most American households did slightly better economically in 2015 than 2014, according to a recent survey by the Federal Reserve. 69% said they were living comfortably or doing okay, up from 65%. But 31% said they were either struggling to get by or just getting by, a figure that includes millions of middle-class Americans. In fact, it can be surprising to learn just which Americans continue to struggle. Judy Woodruff has the latest in our series with The Atlantic.
By almost any measure, Neil Gabler has led a successful life. He's published respected biographies of Walt Disney, Barbra Streisand, and Walter Winchell, written for leading newspapers and magazines, taught at prestigious universities. He's a husband and the father of 2 daughters, now launched in their own successful careers. He lives in New York's Long Island enclave, the Hamptons, a place of natural beauty and mecca for wealth and celebrity. And yet, for years, Neil Gabler harbored a dark secret.
It's very difficult. I'll tell you who it's really been difficult on is my wife.
Being the writer that he is, Gabler decided to come to terms with his secret by writing about it.
I never write about myself, so I didn't embark on this project saying, oh gosh, I can't wait to write about my own failures, which is basically what the article is about. But really the spring of this piece was reading a news item about the Federal Reserve Household Economic Survey, in which they asked the question, if you had a $400 emergency, could you meet that emergency? And 47% of the respondents said that they couldn't meet that emergency without either having to borrow money or to sell something. And I read that item and I said to myself, well, who knew? But of course I knew, because many, many times in my life, and not just in the distant past, but in the unfortunate present, I couldn't afford those $400.
And that's the hard truth. Despite all his outward signs of success, Neil Gabler is frequently broke. His recent story in the Atlantic magazine brought widespread attention to that fact.
Did you hesitate at all about bearing your personal life?
Very much so. I'm not the kind of person who really likes to expose himself. But then that reluctance became part of the article itself, because I coined the term in the article, financial impotence. And it struck me that talking about our financial situation is very much like men not wanting to talk about sexual impotence. It's just not something you do. It's an embarrassment. It's a shame. It's a humiliation. And financial problems are exactly the same thing. So I thought perhaps I can help those people who feel shamed and embarrassed and humiliated, and show them, look it, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to expose all of my faults, all of my mistakes, all of my failures. You're not alone.
What do you say, buddy? How's everything?
Hang it in there, hang it in there.
Gabler knew he wasn't alone even before writing the article, due to weekly chats with Brian Brunges, an East Hampton butcher.
Brian the butcher is my friend. He's a wonderful, easy guy to talk to. And gradually, over time, we'd talk about our financial situation. Very, very rare, particularly among men. And I remember one day, especially, this was one of those periods where I didn't have the $400, and unfortunately they come all too frequently. And he said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, I've been in the same situation, I've got this expense and that expense. If anybody tells you that they're sailing through, they're lying.
Everybody struggles. I have a child with autism. He was diagnosed 20 years ago. Okay, my wife had to stop working. Became a one-income family. We accumulated a lot of outside expenses. So I struggled. But you know what? I got to do what I got to do.
That was almost the final push to write the piece. Because, you know, he's right. There are so many people in trouble. They won't talk about it. Brian is one of the very few who would be open with me, and I was able to be open with him as a result, so that we were able to share this.
It kind of like took a weight off my shoulder, knowing that a guy like Neil, you know, he's got a house in East Hampton. You figure, you know, he's doing all right for himself, but he's not. Everybody's struggling, you know, and it's tough.
The middle class is in desperate straits. I think that's
Edward Wolf is a professor of economics at New York University.
Today, the average family has enough financial reserves to keep it going for about 3 weeks. That's it, and that's middle income. And if you go further down the ladder, basically the financial reserves can keep the family going for a couple of days at most. And so, you know, these financial reserves have just completely evaporated. It's incredible.
We came up with this word, financial fragility, when we thought of looking at the capacity of families to bear a shock, to face a shock.
Anne Maria Lusardi is an economist at George Washington University.
And the way we formulated the question is, how confident are you that you could come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose within the next month? And what we found is 40% of families could not come up with $2,000 in 30 days. So it's important to recognize that the financial fragility is just so widespread.
The main reason is that we've had a long period of wage stagnation in this country, even going further back, even to the mid-1970s. So in the face of stagnating incomes, what did families do? Well, for a while they did accumulate wealth, and this was buoyed by the housing price boom of going forward until 2006, and then suddenly the housing market collapsed, and so did net worth.
How much of what you would describe as your financial condition is due to decisions that Neil Gabler made, and how much of it is due to outside circumstances beyond your control?
That's a great question, and I want to take responsibility. I don't want to put everything off on these larger financial forces. And I chose to become a writer. This is the most financially perilous profession that one can possibly imagine, except possibly being an actor. I chose to live in New York City because I thought I needed to be close to magazines and publishers that I needed for my writing career. So I did that. And New York is expensive. I chose to have 2 children. Children are expensive. I made the choice to send them to expensive colleges. So those were all choices that I made that had serious financial consequences. But again, those choices were what I call life.
So many young people today are told, find your passion and follow it. It sounds like that's what you did.
That's exactly what I did. I followed my bliss, and I'm happy I did. So, I accept responsibility. On the other hand, since roughly half of Americans are suffering the same sort of financial fragility I'm in, we can't say that they're all imbeciles. What we have to say is that there are forces beyond our control.
Let me ask you a couple of other questions about personal decisions you made. Absolutely. You brought it up yourself. The decision to live here. We're in East Hampton. Mm-hmm. People think, living in the Hamptons? That's a really expensive part of America.
When people hear that I live in the Hamptons, the first thing they say to me is, oh my gosh, you live in the Hamptons. What they don't really understand is that there are 2 Hamptons. There are the people who live here full time, as I do, who are not wealthy. And there are the people who come here during the summer who are. So, yes, I do live in the Hamptons. And when I bought this house, I could afford it. It wasn't exorbitantly expensive. I was able to afford it for a very long time.
This is all cedar, but you can see how many shingles are missing here.
Right.
These days, though, the house has fallen into disrepair. It's in desperate need of a new roof. Floorboards are rotting. It has not seen fresh paint in many years.
If I had $100,000, I could probably get it done.
Yeah. Did you ever think about moving to a less expensive part of the country?
We did, and we've talked about that, but here's the catch-22 of that. If we were, once the recession hit, the house lost its value, as it did for, most Americans. So now the house is deteriorating, it's lost its value. So if I had the resources to fix up the house to sell it, I wouldn't need to sell it. That's the catch-22. I am a financial illiterate, and financial illiterates pay a heavy price for their financial illiteracy.
Gabler is not using the term financial illiteracy loosely. It's a phenomenon economists say is a key factor in the current fragility of the middle class.
We measure financial literacy by looking at basic financial knowledge. We are experiencing much more complex financial markets, much more complex financial products than in the past. And the knowledge of people has not kept up.
Half of America will have to compromise on their dreams. There's one statistic that I cite in the piece from a USA Today survey, which I think is fascinating. And that survey determined that a middle-class existence in America would cost $130,000.
A year.
A year. The median income in America is somewhere around $50,000. So a middle-class existence was more than 2 times as great as the median income. And what that tells you is that the face of financial fragility is the face of the college-educated as well as those without a high school diploma. It's the face of, white America as well as the face of minority Americans, who obviously suffer much greater. This is an equal opportunity situation. It affects so many of us. It's a great sadness to think that people feel compelled to give up their dreams of what they thought a modest middle-class life would be. But they have. They have. Even I have.